10 guests Johnny Carson found creepiest. For 30 years, he faced over 22,000 guests, but some didn't just flop, they felt wrong. The kind that makes a legend nervous. Watch till number 8, that one's seriously disturbing. Hit subscribe if you dare. Robert Blake cold stare and quiet hostility. Robert Blake was already a respected name when he appeared on The Tonight Show. With powerful roles in Cold Blood and the television series Beretta, he carried a reputation for intensity and realism. On paper, he seemed like an ideal guest, serious, experienced, and compelling. But what Johnny Carson encountered that night was something else entirely. From the moment Blake took his seat, there was an unmistakable shift in the room. This wasn't the usual tension of a difficult guest. It was quieter, colder. Blake answered questions with short, clipped responses, often laced with sarcasm. At times, he would push back directly, asking Carson, "Why would you ask me that?" Not playfully, but with a sharp edge. What unsettled Carson most was Blake's demeanor. He remained almost completely still, barely blinking, fixing Carson with a hard, unyielding stare. There was a disconnect between his calm, controlled voice and the underlying hostility in what he was saying. It created a sense that something was being held back, something just beneath the surface. Carson, drawing on decades of experience, maintained his professionalism, but those familiar with him noticed the subtle signs. A tighter smile, more frequent glances at his note cards, and a noticeable physical distance between himself and Blake. The audience felt it too. The usual rhythm of laughter disappeared, replaced by an uneasy silence. Even the band seemed unsure how to react. The atmosphere had shifted from entertainment to discomfort. After the show, Carson reportedly remarked that it felt less like a conversation and more like being observed, studied even. Not simply by an unfriendly guest, but by someone whose presence carried a deeper unease. The experience left a lasting impression. Blake was not invited back during Carson's tenure, and years later, when Blake's life became entangled in controversy, Carson is said to have reflected that he wasn't surprised. There was something genuinely disturbing about that man's energy. "I've rarely felt so relieved to end an interview. I felt like I was being sized up by a predator." Andy Kaufman, as Tony Clifton, absolute chaos. Andy Kaufman was already known for his unconventional comedy when he appeared on The Tonight Show as his alter ego, Tony Clifton. Carson had handled Kaufman before, but Clifton was different, intentionally obnoxious, confrontational, and deeply unsettling. From the moment he arrived, already in character, Clifton disrupted everything. Ill-fitting tuxedo, bad wig, oversized sunglasses, and overpowering cologne, he behaved belligerently with staff before even sitting down. Once on the couch, he ignored every unwritten rule, interrupting Carson, insulting Ed McMahon, making crude remarks, and refusing to follow the flow of conversation. What made it disturbing was not just the behavior, but the total commitment. Clifton never broke character. Even as things went off the rails, he responded with disjointed, abrasive comments, making it impossible to establish any normal exchange. It became unclear whether Kaufman was controlling the act or if the character had taken over. The breaking point came when Clifton, unhappy with the band, threw a glass of water at Doc Severinsen. At that moment, Carson did something almost unheard of. He stood up and walked off his own show. Clifton continued the chaos, refusing to leave during the break until security physically removed him. What unfolded felt less like comedy and more like a breakdown, made more unsettling by the fact that it was intentional. When Carson returned, he was visibly tense. Later, he admitted it wasn't just the behavior, but the refusal to acknowledge reality that disturbed him most. Kaufman remained welcome. Tony Clifton did not. Divine, a shock to 1970s America. Divine was already a countercultural figure when appearing on The Tonight Show in the mid-1970s, known for John Waters' films like Pink Flamingos and Female Trouble. But bringing that persona onto mainstream television was something entirely different. With a towering beehive wig, heavy makeup, and a deliberately provocative presence, Divine represented a direct challenge to the norms of the time. This was long before drag had any broad acceptance, and from the moment Divine walked on stage, Johnny Carson was visibly out of his comfort zone. There was no hostility. Divine was professional and prepared. What unsettled Carson was the quiet tension created by the disruption of traditional expectations. He remained courteous, but his reactions told the story. He kept more physical distance, his laughter sounded slightly forced, and his timing was just off. It was clear he was searching for the right way to engage, but never quite found it. The audience mirrored that uncertainty. Some laughed nervously, others sat in silence, unsure how to respond. Even the atmosphere in the studio felt different, less controlled, more unpredictable. Carson occasionally glanced toward Ed McMahon as if looking for support. And when references to John Waters' more controversial work came up, he had no clear way to respond. When the interview ended, his relief was evident. Off camera, he remarked, "Well, that was certainly something different for the folks in Omaha tonight." Despite his discomfort, Carson never treated Divine disrespectfully. And in the end, the moment stood as a sign of a changing culture, one he was willing to present, even if it unsettled him. If you remember moments like this, let us know in the comments. Margaux Hemingway, a disturbing spiral. In the late 1970s, Margaux Hemingway was the picture of success, one of the world's top models, the face of Fabergé Babe perfume, and the granddaughter of literary legend Ernest Hemingway. Her earlier appearances on The Tonight Show were poised, glamorous, and effortless. But her final appearance in the early 1980s was something very different. What should have been a routine promotional interview quickly took a troubling turn. From the start, it was clear something was wrong. Hemingway appeared disoriented, her speech uneven and scattered, her eyes distant and unfocused. Carson, known for his sensitivity, didn't react with irritation but with genuine concern. What made the moment so unsettling was not hostility, but disconnection. She would begin answering a question, then drift off mid-sentence, staring into space for long, uncomfortable stretches, only to suddenly resume speaking as if nothing had happened. At times, she responded to questions that hadn't even been asked, creating the eerie sense she was in a different conversation altogether. Carson tried to steady the exchange, asking simple, clear questions in hopes of grounding her, but the answers remained fragmented and confusing. The audience grew quiet, the usual laughter faded, replaced by uneasy silence. As the segment continued, Carson spoke less, not out of impatience, but in an effort to minimize the situation. Those present could see it clearly. He wasn't dealing with a difficult guest. He was witnessing someone in distress. Afterward, when someone made light of the situation, Carson reportedly stopped them, saying, "That wasn't someone being difficult, that was someone in trouble." Years later, as more became known about Hemingway's struggles with addiction and mental health, that appearance took on deeper meaning. What had seemed like an awkward moment on television was, in truth, something far more serious, a quiet warning that few fully understood at the time. Andy Warhol, the dead-eyed silence. Andy Warhol's appearance on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s was unlike anything Johnny Carson had ever experienced. Not because of chaos or confrontation, but because of something far more unsettling, complete detachment. Warhol barely spoke. When he did, it was often a single word. The rest of the time, he simply nodded or stared straight through Carson, as if he weren't even there. It wasn't an interview, it felt more like performance art. From the moment he sat down, the rhythm of the show collapsed. Carson asked thoughtful, engaging questions, but received almost nothing in return. Even humor didn't work. Warhol would give a faint, distant smile, acknowledging the joke without ever joining it. The audience grew uneasy. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. The longer it went on, the stranger it felt. Carson tried everything: open questions, direct comments, even gently addressing the awkwardness, but nothing broke through. At one point, he asked plainly, "Do you even want to be here?" Warhol simply shrugged. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't nervousness. It was something colder, an absence of connection. One staff member later described it as an existential vacuum, where normal human interaction simply stopped working. Carson later said it felt like interviewing a ghost, one that knew something you didn't. Afterward, he admitted he couldn't decide whether it was the worst interview he'd ever done or brilliant performance art. Either way, it left him deeply unsettled. If moments like these resonate with you, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories you won't want to miss. Klaus Kinski, Wild-Eyed Rage. Klaus Kinski was already infamous in the film world for his explosive temperament and intense performances in films like Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and Nosferatu. But when he appeared on The Tonight Show in the late 1970s, that intensity became something far more unsettling. From the moment he stepped onto the stage, there was a palpable sense of danger. His eyes were wide, unblinking, almost feverish, and he seemed to vibrate with barely contained rage. Carson, who usually leaned in toward his guests, instinctively leaned away. What made the encounter especially troubling was the disconnect. Carson would ask a simple question, and Kinski would respond with long, erratic monologues about art, religion, or the end of the world. When Carson tried to lighten the mood, Kinski would fix him with a cold, hostile stare so intense it made the audience gasp. Backstage, security was quietly put on alert. Producers even discussed cutting the segment early. Carson, though outwardly calm, was carefully calculating every move, trying to keep the situation from escalating. As Ed McMahon later recalled, it felt less like an interview and more like sitting next to a bomb that could go off at any moment. What disturbed Carson most were Kinski's eyes unblinking, locked in, almost predatory. One crew member said looking at him felt like watching a storm building, knowing something destructive was coming. In the end, the interview made it to commercial, but just barely. Carson later admitted it was the only time he truly wondered if a guest might turn violent on air. The moment became legendary behind the scenes. For years afterward, whenever a difficult guest was booked, producers would reassure Carson with one line, "At least it's not Kinski." George Jessel, a relic out of time. George Jessel came from a very different era. A vaudeville performer and film producer whose career began in the early 20th century, he represented a style of entertainment that had long since faded by the time he appeared on The Tonight Show in the early 1970s. What Carson didn't expect was just how out of step that style had become. After a polite introduction, Carson invited Jessel to share stories from his long career. But instead of light, nostalgic reflections, Jessel launched into a string of outdated jokes and remarks that no longer fit the times and were deeply uncomfortable for a modern audience. The reaction was immediate. The studio fell completely silent, not confusion, but shock. The kind of silence where everyone is thinking the same thing. Did he really just say that? Carson held a strained smile, clearly trying to regain control without escalating the situation. What made it even more difficult was Jessel's complete lack of awareness. He continued speaking as if expecting laughter, even appearing confused when none came. Carson was placed in an impossible position. Challenging him directly would create tension on air. Laughing it off would send the wrong message. Ending the segment abruptly would make the situation obvious. So he did the only thing he could. He cut to commercial early. When the show returned, Jessel was gone. Backstage, Carson made it clear this was not what the show stood for. Jessel was not invited back. And the incident led to stricter screening for future guests. What lingered wasn't just the material but the disconnect. A man from another time, unaware that the world had changed. And for years afterward, whenever a questionable guest was suggested, one question always came up. Are we looking at another Jessel situation? Vincent Price, the Charming Chill. Unlike most names on this list, Vincent Price wasn't a difficult guest, he was a favorite, a legend of horror cinema. Price brought with him a rare blend of elegance, intelligence, and theatrical darkness that made every appearance memorable. But even as Johnny Carson enjoyed having him on, there were moments when things felt just a little too real. Price had a remarkable ability to shift without warning. One moment, he'd be speaking calmly about cooking or art collecting. The next, his voice would drop into that unmistakable tone, slow, ominous, almost hypnotic. And when it did, Carson would visibly react, leaning back slightly, laughing, but clearly unsettled. During one unforgettable segment, Price read Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven under dim lights and candle glow. As his voice grew more intense, the atmosphere in the studio changed. Carson later admitted that, For a moment, he forgot they were even on a television set. It felt real. Price seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He would play with that eerie persona, bringing out props like rubber bats or spiders, even handing Carson a mounted bat as a gift. Carson handled it politely, but the discomfort was clear. On one occasion, while describing a gruesome scene, Price suddenly grabbed Carson's wrist and whispered a line. Carson jumped, genuinely startled, and later joked he thought Price might actually bite him. That was the strange magic of Vincent Price. He could unsettle you and make you enjoy it at the same time. As Carson once put it, he was the only man who could truly scare you and still leave you hoping he'd come back and do it again. Did Vincent Price entertain you, or did he give you chills? If you felt it too, go ahead and like the video and subscribe for more stories just like this. Thanks you. Truman Capote ghost at the mic. Truman Capote was one of America's most celebrated authors, known for In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's. With his distinctive voice and eccentric personality, he had long been a familiar and entertaining presence on talk shows throughout the 1960s and early 70s. But in his later appearances, something changed. As his personal struggles deepened, Capote's visits to The Tonight Show took on a far more unsettling tone. He would speak in a faint, almost whispering voice, trailing off mid-sentence into long silences, then suddenly continuing as if nothing had happened. Carson later described it as trying to interview someone who kept fading in and out, like a ghost. During one particularly troubling appearance, Capote arrived visibly impaired and launched into rambling, disjointed stories about death, hidden secrets, and strange experiences. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or be concerned. What made it even more disturbing was his presence. He would stare past Carson into empty space, smiling at nothing, as if reacting to something no one else could see. At times, he would turn back and quietly ask, "You don't really believe that, do you, Johnny?" Carson remained professional, but those who knew him could see the discomfort. This wasn't just a difficult guest, it felt like something far stranger. The interview became so incoherent that it was cut short. Afterward, Carson reportedly compared it to listening to a haunted house tell its own story. He had handled unpredictable guests before, but this was different. As he later said, it felt like speaking to someone who was only halfway present and halfway somewhere else entirely. When Capo was eventually invited back years later, strict precautions were taken to ensure he was in better condition. But Carson reportedly remained wary throughout the interview. Johnny Carson calm on the surface, unsettled beneath. In the end, the most revealing figure in all of these moments isn't just the guests, it's Johnny Carson himself. For over 30 years on The Tonight Show, Carson built a reputation as the unshakable host. Smooth, composed, always in control. No matter who sat across from him, he kept the show moving with charm, timing, and quiet authority. With Truman Capote, it felt like speaking to someone fading in and out of reality. With Klaus Kinski, like sitting beside something ready to explode. With Robert Blake, the air turned cold and watchful. And with Andy Warhol, even conversation itself seemed to disappear. And yet Carson never broke. That was his gift. Not just asking the right questions, but sensing what kind of person he was dealing with. He knew the difference between difficult, performative, and deeply unsettling. His reactions, subtle shifts, a tighter smile, a slight lean away became the real measure of what was happening in that chair. If Johnny Carson felt uneasy, you knew something wasn't quite right. Because for all the strange guests who came and went, Carson remained the constant, the steady presence in the middle of it all. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. If a man like Johnny Carson, who had truly seen everything, still got the chills, then those moments weren't just unusual. They were unforgettable. If you're a true Johnny Carson fan, comment number 10, and want to relive these rare and frustrating moments, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There's always more fun behind the scenes. So here's the question that really lingers. Who unsettled you the most? Was it the ones who exploded, or the ones who barely said a word? Because sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones that stay with you the longest. Johnny Carson faced them all, but a few of them clearly left a mark. And thank you for watching all the way to the end.